The wounded stranger asked for the barn, but the widow heard his pain before his name. The first time Ruth Callahan saw the stranger, she thought the desert had finally sent her a ghost. He came riding out of the red afternoon dust with one hand pressed against his side, his hat low over his eyes, and a tired black horse moving as if every step cost more than the last. The sun was sinking behind the low hills of western Kansas, turning the grass gold and the fence wire bright as fire. Ruth stood at her kitchen window with a flour sack in her arms and forgot, for one breath, how lonely the house had been. Then the rider swayed in the saddle. That brought her back to herself. Lonely or not, Ruth Callahan was not a woman who opened her door to trouble without thinking. She had buried a husband, held a ranch together through drought, chased off 2 coyotes with a cracked shotgun, and learned that kind eyes could lie as easily as cruel ones. So when the stranger stopped at her front gate, she did not run outside with pity in her hands. She took the shotgun from beside the door first. The rider saw it before she reached the porch. He lifted one hand slowly, palm open, the other still pressed tight to his ribs. Even from the steps, Ruth could see dark blood spreading across the left side of his faded shirt. "I mean no harm, ma'am," he called. His voice was rough but steady, not drunk, not wild, not begging. Ruth kept the shotgun pointed at the porch floor. Then, why ride up to a widow's place near sundown? Something passed across his face at the word widow, not surprise exactly, more like a man hearing a bell he had not expected. "My horse needs water," he said, "and I need one night in your barn if you'll allow it. I can pay." "You're bleeding." "I know. That usually means a man has been shot, stabbed, or foolish." A tired corner of his mouth moved, but the smile did not stay. "Shot. By who?" He looked past her toward the empty prairie, where the trail dipped and vanished between cottonwoods. "Men who believe I owe them something." Ruth's fingers tightened around the shotgun. Inside the house, the lamp on the table flickered in a small draft. It had been 11 months since Thomas Callahan died in the east pasture with his hand still wrapped around the reins of a horse that came home without him. 11 months since Ruth had eaten supper with another living soul across from her. 11 months since a man's voice had filled the kitchen without asking about cattle prices, feed bills, or whether she planned to sell. Now a wounded stranger stood at her gate with danger behind him and pain in his eyes. She should have told him to ride on. Instead, she looked at his horse. The animal's head hung low. Its left front leg trembled with exhaustion. Dust clung to its mane and sweat had dried white along its neck. Whatever the stranger had done, the horse had done nothing. "There's a trough by the barn," Ruth said. "Water your horse, then come to the back steps." The stranger did not move. "I asked for the barn, ma'am, not your house." "And I said back steps." His eyes lifted to hers then. They were gray, clear, and guarded, like a storm held behind glass. "You don't know me." "No," Ruth said, "but I know enough about wounds to know you won't last till morning if that blood keeps running." He stood a moment longer, as if kindness had become harder to accept than a gun barrel. Then he gave a small nod. "My name is Cole Mercer." Ruth did not give him hers yet. She watched him lead the horse to the barn. He moved slowly, but not weakly. Every step looked measured, controlled, as if pain was something he had learned to keep in a box. He removed the saddle before taking water for himself. He rubbed the horse's neck with a gentleness that did not match the gun belt on his hips. That was the first thing that unsettled Ruth. Not the blood. Not the guns. The gentleness. By the time Cole Mercer came to the back steps, Ruth had laid out clean cloth, hot water, a needle, thread, and the little brown bottle of carbolic Thomas had once bought from a doctor in Dodge City. She had never wanted to use it again after Thomas died, but life on the frontier had a mean habit of keeping painful things useful. Cole stopped in the doorway when he saw the kitchen. It was not much: a pine table, 2 chairs, a stove blackened from years of use, a shelf of jars, a faded blue curtain moving gently in the open window, but his face changed as if he had stepped close to something he did not think he deserved. "Sit," Ruth said. He sat. When he pulled his shirt loose from his side, Ruth drew one careful breath. The wound was a deep graze along his ribs, angry and raw, but the bullet had passed clean. Painful, dangerous if left dirty, but not death if handled right. "You've had luck," she said. Cole looked down at the wound. "That's not the word I would have used." "It is if you've seen worse." He did not answer. She cleaned the wound while he gripped the edge of the table. His knuckles whitened, but he never cursed, never grabbed her wrist, never made one rough move. Outside, his horse shifted in the barn. A loose hinge tapped in the evening wind. The house felt too quiet around them, yet not empty in the same way it had that morning. "What kind of men were chasing you?" Ruth asked. Cole's jaw tightened. "The kind a man is ashamed to have known." "That answer tells me little." "It tells you enough for tonight." Ruth paused with the needle in her hand. "This is my house." "I know. My land. I know that too. If trouble follows you here, I have a right to know before it reaches my gate." For the first time, Cole looked directly at her without that careful distance. "You do," he said softly. "And if I'm still here when the sun comes up, I'll tell you more than I want to." It was not a promise made easily. Ruth could hear that. She tied the final bandage and stepped back. "You'll sleep in the barn like you asked," she said. "There's dry hay in the east stall. Breakfast is at first light if you're still breathing." Cole stood slowly. "You don't have to feed me." "I know." He reached for his hat, then stopped. His hand rested on the brim for a moment, trembling just enough for Ruth to notice. "Thank you, Mrs. Callahan," she said. "Ruth Callahan." "Thank you, Mrs. Callahan." He left by the back door, taking the cold air with him. Ruth stood beside the table and listened to his steps fade across the yard. She should have felt relieved when the door closed. Instead, the silence that returned felt heavier than before, as if the house had remembered what another voice sounded like and hated losing it. She washed the blood from the basin. She folded the cloths. She checked the door latch twice. Then, just before putting out the lamp, she saw something on the kitchen chair where Cole had been sitting. A small leather pouch had slipped from his coat pocket. Ruth picked it up, meaning only to place it by the door for morning. But the cord had come loose, and a folded paper slid halfway out. She caught it before it fell. On the paper was a name printed in dark ink. Not Cole Mercer. Silas Vane. Wanted for armed robbery, cattle theft, and the killing of Deputy Amos Reed. Ruth's breath stopped. Across the bottom of the notice, in careful handwriting, someone had written one sentence. Not guilty of Reed's death, proof hidden in Abilene. Ruth stared toward the dark window, where the barn sat black against the last silver line of evening. The wounded man sleeping in her hay was either a wanted killer hiding behind a false name, or a hunted man carrying the truth that could save him. And somewhere beyond the prairie darkness, the men who wanted that truth buried were still riding. Ruth did not sleep much that night. She sat in the chair beside the cold stove with the wanted notice folded in her lap, and the shotgun leaning close enough for her hand to find it in the dark. The lamp had burned low, throwing a weak yellow circle over the kitchen table. Outside, the wind moved along the walls like fingers searching for a crack. Silas Vane. The name sat inside her mind like a stone. She had heard it before, not clearly, not enough to know the man's face. Just whispers in town, murmurs near the mercantile counter, the kind of talk folks lowered their voices for when a woman stepped near. There had been talk of a stolen herd near Ellsworth, A deputy dead outside a jail yard. A gang that rode under a man named Mercer Pike, a name that made ranchers check their windows and travelers hurry through crossroads before dark. And now, a wounded stranger calling himself Cole Mercer was sleeping in her barn, with a wanted paper for Sela's vein in his pouch. Ruth looked toward the window again. The barn stood quiet, no lantern inside, no movement, no sound except one soft stamp from the horse now and then. She tried to tell herself that a guilty man would have taken the house by force. A cruel man would not have cared for his horse before himself. A liar would have spoken too easily. But grief had taught Ruth that loneliness could make a person excuse what they should fear. Near midnight she rose, crossed to Thomas's old desk, and slid the wanted notice into the top drawer. Her fingers brushed the letters still tied with blue ribbon inside. Thomas's letters from before they married. She had not read them in months. She did not need to. She knew every line by heart. I will build you a porch facing west, Ruth. We will watch the sun go down from there when we are old. The porch had been built. They had not grown old. Ruth closed the drawer carefully. When dawn finally came, it came cold. Frost silvered the pump handle. The grass shone pale and brittle. Ruth wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped onto the back porch with the shotgun tucked in the crook of her arm. Smoke did not rise from the barn. Cole had not made a fire. That told her either he was respectful, cautious, or gone. She crossed the yard. The barn door stood half open. The black horse lifted its head from fresh hay and watched her with calm dark eyes. Its leg had been rubbed down and wrapped cleanly. The saddle was hung properly over the rail. The bridle was oiled. A bucket of water sat full beside the stall. Cole Mercer was on the floor near the east wall, sitting with his back against a hay bale, one hand resting on his bandaged ribs. His hat covered his face. For one sharp second, Ruth thought he was dead. Then he spoke without moving. "If you came to see whether I stole your horse, I didn't." Ruth stopped in the doorway. "If you had stolen my horse, I would not be standing here talking." He lifted the hat from his face. His skin looked pale beneath the dust. Fever had not taken him, but pain had carved deeper lines around his mouth. "You slept out here without a blanket," she said. "There was hay. There are also blankets. I didn't want to touch more than I was given." Ruth hated that the answer moved something in her. She stepped farther inside and set a tin cup of coffee on an overturned crate. "Drink." He looked at the cup, then at the shotgun, then back at her. Did something change since last night? Ruth did not answer at once. A shaft of morning light fell through a crack in the barn wall and cut across his boots. They were worn almost through at the soles. His gun belt lay beside him, not strapped on. Both revolvers were still in their holsters, but the belt was out of reach unless he lunged for it. He had done that on purpose. "You dropped something in my kitchen," Ruth said. Cole's face changed. It was small, but she saw it. A hard stillness. A man standing at the edge of a cliff and hearing a stone fall. "What did you see?" "A wanted notice." He closed his eyes for one breath. "For Sela's vein," she said. When his eyes opened, there was no anger in them. That surprised her more than anger would have. "I can explain." "I hope so." "I was Sela's vein." Ruth's hand tightened around the shotgun. Cole did not move. "Was," she said. "That was the name I used with Pike's outfit." "Mercer Pike." His gaze lowered. "You've heard of him." "I've heard enough to know decent men avoid his shadow." "I was not always decent." The words were quiet, not polished, not meant to win her pity. Ruth stood with the cold air pressing at her back and the smell of hay around her. A year ago, Thomas would have stepped between her and a man like this. 11 months ago, she might have wished for that. But the land had forced her to become her own wall. She did not step back. Did you kill Deputy Reed? No. Did you rob cattle? I helped move cattle that were not Pike's. That is a careful answer. It is the honest one. Honest does not mean clean. No, ma'am, Cole said, it doesn't. The horse shifted in its stall, the quiet scrape of hoof against wood filling the space between them. Cole looked toward the open door, toward the pale morning beyond it. My name is Cole Mercer. Silas Vane was the name Pike gave me because men with clean names are easier to trace. I worked for him for 4 years, guarding drives, collecting debts, standing near doors so frightened men signed papers they should not have signed. Ruth felt a chill that had nothing to do with the frost. And Deputy Reed. He found a ledger, names, payments, land deeds, bribes, proof enough to bring Pike down if it reached a judge who was not already bought. Cole swallowed hard. Reed came to me because I had started asking questions. He thought I might help him get it to Abilene. Did you? I tried. His voice roughened on those 2 words. Ruth studied his face. Pain had a way of stripping men down. Sometimes it showed cowardice, sometimes cruelty, sometimes nothing at all. On Cole Mercer it showed a grief he carried like an old brand. What happened? Pike's men caught us outside a line shack north of Salina. Reed hid part of the proof before they reached him. I drew them off. When I came back, he was dying. Ruth held still. He gave me the location with his last breath, Cole said. Then Pike's men found him and put the blame on me. Easier that way. A false name, a gunman, no family to speak for me, who would doubt it? And the proof? Still hidden, in Abilene if Reed's words were true. Then why are you riding west instead of going there? His gaze met hers. Because 3 men followed me out of Hayes. If I led them straight to the proof, Pike would have it burned before sundown. I was trying to lose them first. Ruth remembered the blood on his shirt, the way he had looked down the valley road before answering simple questions. Did you lose them? I thought I did. That is not yes. No, he said, it is not. The truth settled between them, colder than the morning. Ruth looked at the man sitting in her barn, a former outlaw, a hunted witness, a stranger who might bring danger to the only home she had left. She should have ordered him off the place and sent word to town. She should have done the hard, sensible thing. But then Cole tried to stand, and the color left his face. He caught the hay bale with one hand, his breath locked in his throat. Ruth moved before thinking, stepping forward and gripping his arm to steady him. For one moment, they were close enough that she saw the small scar along his jaw, the dust in his eyelashes, the shame he tried to hide behind quiet. He looked at her hand on his sleeve. You should send me away, he said. Yes, Ruth answered. But she did not let go. The barn door creaked behind her in the wind. Far down the valley road, a crow lifted from a fence post and cut across the pale sky. Ruth released him slowly. You are not riding anywhere today, she said. Mrs. Callahan. You'll tear that wound open before you reach the creek. If Pike's riders come here, you'll wish I had gone. If Pike's riders come here, I would rather know before they reach my porch. Cole stared at her, as if he did not understand the kind of courage that stayed instead of ran. Ruth picked up his gun belt from the floor and hung it on a peg out of his reach. You can have these back when I trust you more than I fear you. For the first time that morning, something almost like respect softened his eyes. That may take a while. I have work that has waited longer. She turned toward the door, then paused. Breakfast is in 10 minutes. After that, you will tell me everything you remember about the men following you. And if I refuse? Ruth looked back at him. Then you can explain to your horse why he is eating breakfast and you are not. Cole's mouth twitched. but the smile faded when another sound rolled faintly over the open land. Not thunder. Hooves. Ruth and Cole both turned toward the valley road. At first there was nothing but pale grass, wind, and the long, empty trail. Then, beyond the cottonwoods, a thin brown line of dust began to rise. Cole's face went still. Ruth knew before he spoke. "They found the valley," he said. The dust beyond the cottonwoods rose slow and steady, like a warning that had taken the shape of the road. Ruth stood in the barn doorway with the cold morning air against her face and watched it climb. One rider could raise dust if he pushed hard enough. Two could do the same, but this was wider, thicker, broken by dark specks that moved in and out of sight along the bend. Cole reached for the wall, not for balance this time, but because every part of him had sharpened. "How many?" Ruth asked. He narrowed his eyes. "Can't tell yet." "Guess." "3, maybe 4. You said 3 followed you out of haze." "I said 3 that I saw." Ruth looked at him. "You make a habit of leaving important pieces out. When they keep people alive. That is not as comforting as you think." He turned from the road and looked toward the house. "Do you have a cellar?" "Storm pit under the pantry." "Good, you go there. Take water, shells, and whatever money you keep hidden. If they ride up and ask, you never saw me." Ruth gave a short laugh with no joy in it. "You think men following you will believe a bleeding horse and a fresh bandage appeared by prayer. They don't need to believe it. They only need not find you. I am not hiding under my own floor while strangers tear through my land." Cole's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Callahan, this is not stubbornness weather. These men are not feed merchants with bad manners." "No," she said. "They are men who think a widow alone is easy ground." The words came out harder than she expected. For a second, she heard all the months behind them. The banker who had smiled too gently while asking if she wanted to sell before winter broke her. The neighbor who said a woman had no business managing cattle without a man's hand. The men in town who spoke to her hat brim instead of her eyes. Cole heard it too. His face changed, not with pity but with understanding. "I have no right to ask you to risk yourself," he said. "You did not ask." The dust moved closer. Ruth stepped inside the barn, pulled the door wider, and pointed to the old ladder leading to the loft. "Can you climb?" "Not well." "That was not what I asked." He looked at the ladder, then at her. "Yes." "Then climb." "Why?" "Because from that loft window, you can see the yard and the road. And because if you stand outside bleeding like a prize bull, they will know exactly where to look." Cole held her gaze for 1 second, then nodded. Pride did not slow him much, though pain did. He moved to the ladder and climbed with his left arm tight to his side. Twice he stopped. Twice Ruth looked away so he would not feel watched in his weakness. When he reached the loft, he crouched beside the small square window that faced the road. Ruth took his gun belt from the peg. Cole looked down. "Mrs. Callahan, you said they are not feed merchants. Those guns bring trouble. So do empty hands when trouble arrives." She climbed halfway up and handed him the belt. His fingers brushed hers when he took it. His hand was warm despite the cold. "I hope you do not need them," she said. "So do I." Ruth went back down, crossed to the stall, and checked the black horse's rope. Then she walked to the house. She did not hurry. She would not give the riders the pleasure of seeing fear from a distance. Inside, she loaded the shotgun with 2 steady hands. Her heart beat hard enough to shake her ribs, but her fingers remembered. Thomas had taught her after a wolf took one of their calves. She had hated the feel of the gun then. Later, after Thomas died, she had hated being grateful for the lesson. On the kitchen table sat 2 plates she had set out before dawn without thinking. 2. She stared at them for half a breath, then took one plate away. Not because Cole did not matter. Because men who look through windows notice things. She shoved the second cup into the pantry, wiped the table, and opened the front door before the riders reached the gate. Let them see her waiting. Let them understand they had not surprised her. There were 4 of them. The first was a lean man in a brown coat with a narrow face and pale eyes that did not settle in one place for long. The second was thick through the chest and wore his hat too low. The third was younger, with nervous hands. The fourth stayed back near the cottonwoods, sitting loose in the saddle like a man watching more than the yard. The lean man smiled when he saw Ruth. It was not a kind smile. "Morning, ma'am." Ruth stood on the porch with the shotgun angled down. "Road is over there." "We're aware." "Then you are lost on purpose." The young one shifted in his saddle. The thick man looked at the barn. The rider by the cottonwoods did not move. The lean man touched the brim of his hat. "Name S. Wade Barlow. We're looking for a man, tall, dark hair, gray eyes, riding a black gelding, might be wounded." Ruth said nothing. Barlow's smile widened. "That description trouble you any?" "Most descriptions of strange men trouble me." "Fair enough." He looked toward the barn. Ruth felt her pulse climb, but she kept her face still. The barn door stood open just enough to show the horse in the stall, not enough to show the loft. "That your horse?" Barlow asked. "No." "Then whose?" "A lame horse that came in last night." "With no man attached?" "With a man attached long enough to ask for water." "And where is that man now?" "Gone." "Which direction?" Ruth lifted her chin toward the west trail. "He said he had business in Abilene." The lie landed cleanly. She felt its weight after it left her mouth. Barlow studied her. "Abilene is east." Then he was either lost or lying. The thick man snorted. The young rider almost smiled before Barlow glanced at him and wiped the smile off his face. Barlow leaned forward in the saddle. "Ma'am, this man is wanted. Dangerous. He killed a deputy and stole from honest cattlemen." Ruth thought of the note in Thomas's desk. Proof hidden in Abilene. "Honest cattlemen have a strange way of sending 4 riders after one wounded man," she said. The smile left Barlow's mouth. "You careful now?" "I am careful every day." The rider by the cottonwoods finally moved closer. His face came into clearer view, older than the others, beard streaked with gray. He did not look at Ruth first. He looked at the barn loft window. Ruth felt the air shift. From the loft came no sound. The older rider spoke quietly. "Mind if we look around?" "Yes." Barlow turned his head. "Ma'am." "I mind. We have cause." "You have no badge." "We have authority." "Not on my land." The thick man's hand dropped near his revolver. Ruth raised the shotgun to her shoulder so smoothly it startled even her. The porch boards creaked beneath her feet. "Move that hand again," she said, "and your friends will carry you away with less pride than you rode in with." For a moment, nothing breathed. Even the horses seemed to understand. Then Barlow laughed softly, but there was anger under it. "You've got a sharp tongue for a woman alone." Ruth held the shotgun steady. A woman alone learns what a dull tongue costs. Above them, hidden in shadow, Cole watched through the loft window with his hand near his gun. Ruth could not see him, but she felt his stillness like a second heartbeat in the yard. Barlow looked from Ruth to the barn, then toward the house. His eyes paused on the window, on the pump, on the fresh hoof prints in the mud. He knew. Not enough to prove it. Enough to enjoy it. "We'll be back," he said. That seems to be a habit among unwanted men. The young rider's face flushed. The thick one glared. The older rider still watched the loft window. Barlow tipped his hat. When Sela's vein comes back through, you tell him Mercer Pike wants what he stole. Ruth did not blink. I do not carry messages for criminals. Barlow smiled again. No, ma'am, you shelter them. He turned his horse. The four riders moved back toward the valley road, slow as if daring her to fire after them. Ruth kept the shotgun raised until they reached the cottonwoods. Only when the dust swallowed them did her arms begin to shake. She lowered the gun. For several long breaths, she stood on the porch, staring at the empty road. Then Cole's voice came from behind her. You lied well. Ruth turned. He had come down from the loft and crossed the yard without her hearing him. His face was pale again, but his eyes were fixed on the road with a hard, troubled look. You noticed. I noticed you sent them toward Abilene. You said the proof was there. I also said I was trying not to lead them to it. Ruth's stomach tightened. The lie that had felt clever a minute ago now opened under her like a trap door. Cole looked at her and there was no blame in his face. That almost made it worse. If they believe you, he said, they will ride east. If they ride east, they may reach Abilene before us. Before us. The word left her before she could stop it. Cole turned fully toward her. I can't stay here and wait for Pike's men to come back with more, and I can't let them find Reed's proof first. Ruth glanced at the porch, the fields, the barn, the house Thomas had built board by board with his own hands. This is my ranch, she said. I know. My cattle, my land, my husband's grave. I know that too. But the road lay open beyond the gate. Dust still hung where the riders had gone, and somewhere far east, hidden proof could decide whether Cole Mercer was a killer or a man trying to crawl out from under another man's darkness. Ruth's throat tightened. She had spent 11 months trying to keep the world from taking one more thing from her. Now the world had ridden straight to her gate and asked her to choose. Cole's voice softened. You don't have to come. Ruth looked down at the shotgun in her hands, then toward the barn where the black horse waited, then at the lonely kitchen window where one cup sat on the table and one had been hidden away. A strange calm settled over her. No, she said, but if my lie sent those men toward the truth, then I will not sit here pretending it did not. Cole stared at her. Ruth stepped off the porch. We leave before noon, she said. And for the first time since Thomas died, Ruth Callahan turned away from the safety of her own home and walked toward a danger she had chosen. By noon, the Callahan ranch looked as if it had been holding its breath. Ruth moved through the house with quick, quiet purpose, packing only what could fit in 2 saddlebags and 1 bedroll. Coffee, hard biscuits, dried apples, a small pouch of coins, a tin of salve, needle and thread, extra cartridges, and Thomas's old map of the trails between her ranch and Abilene. She took the map from the drawer with care, smoothing it on the kitchen table as if touching it too roughly might wake the past. Thomas had marked places in pencil. Good water. Bad crossing. Do not camp near cottonwoods here. His handwriting leaned slightly right, steady and plain. Ruth stood over the map for a moment longer than she meant to. She could almost hear him behind her, teasing gently that she packed like a woman preparing to cross the whole continent instead of one corner of Kansas. But Thomas was not there. Only the stove ticking as it cooled. Only the wind pushing at the curtain. Only Cole Mercer outside, saddling a horse with a wound in his side and a past at his back. Ruth folded the map and slid it into her coat. Then she opened Thomas's desk. The wanted notice lay where she had hidden it beside the old letters tied with blue ribbon. Ruth looked at the letters first. They had been part of a life that felt both close and unreachable, like a house seen across floodwater. She touched the ribbon once, then took the wanted notice and folded it into her pocket. Not because she trusted Cole completely. Because if she was going to ride beside a man accused of murder, she wanted the shadow riding with them where she could see it. Outside, Cole had both horses ready. Ruth's mare, Juniper, tossed her head when Ruth came near, sensing the hurry in the air. Juniper was a small chestnut with a white blaze and more spirit than size. Thomas had bought her for Ruth 2 summers before he died, saying every woman who ran a ranch deserved a horse that thought for herself. Cole's black gelding stood calmer beside her, though his ears flicked toward every distant sound. "You sure about this mare?" Cole asked. Ruth tied her saddlebag. "She has carried me through worse ground than this." "I meant, are you sure about leaving at all?" She looked at him over Juniper's back. "You asked that already. And I'll likely ask again. Then I'll likely give the same answer." Cole tightened the cinch with his right hand, careful not to pull too hard with the left. His face was paler than he wanted her to notice. She noticed anyway. "You should be in a bed," she said. "You have one of those on the trail." "No." "Then I'll take the saddle." Ruth did not smile, but something inside her softened against her will. He had pain in every movement, yet he did not complain. Not because he was trying to look brave. She had seen that kind of foolish pride in men at cattle auctions. Cole's silence was different. It was a habit built over years of having no safe place to be weak. She knew something about habits built from sorrow. Before mounting, she looked once toward the oak tree behind the house. Thomas's grave sat there beneath a low wooden marker, shaded by bare branches that would not leaf again until spring. Ruth had planned to whitewash the marker before winter. She had planned to mend the south fence. She had planned to stay exactly where grief had left her and call it loyalty. Now she was riding away with a stranger. Cole followed her gaze but said nothing. Ruth appreciated that. She walked to the oak tree while he held both horses. The ground was cold beneath her boots. Dry leaves gathered against the marker. She brushed them away with her gloved hand. "I don't know if this is foolish," she whispered, "but I know I can't hide from every road just because one road took you from me." The wind moved through the branches. No answer came. Ruth had stopped expecting answers from the dead months ago. Still, speaking the words made her breathe easier. When she returned, Cole looked down at the reins in his hands. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she said, "but go on." They rode east. For the first hour, neither spoke. The ranch shrank behind them until the house became a pale square against the land, then a memory tucked into the fold of the hills. Ruth kept her shoulders straight and her eyes forward. She would not look back again, not until she meant to return. The trail cut through dry grass and low scrub, then dipped toward a shallow creek where cottonwoods leaned over the water. Cole rode slightly ahead, not enough to lead her like a helpless thing, just enough to read the ground before her mare stepped into it. His black gelding moved better after rest, though not with full strength. Ruth watched the land as Thomas had taught her. Fresh tracks. Broken weeds. A smear of mud where hooves had crossed earlier that morning. At the creek, Cole dismounted slowly and crouched near the bank. His jaw tightened when the wound pulled. Ruth stayed mounted, scanning the tree line. "4 horses," he said, "same riders." "How far ahead?" 2, maybe 3 hours. "Can we catch them?" "Not if I want to keep my stitches inside me." "That sounds useful." He glanced up at her. "You always talk this calmly when trouble is close." "No, sometimes I talk calmer." This time he did smile, small, brief, but real. Then his eyes moved to the mud again and the smile disappeared. "They split here." Ruth leaned forward. "Split?" 3 kept east, 1 turned south. "Why?" To circle back. Cole stood, looking toward the low ridge beyond the creek. "Barlow is careful. He'll send 1 man behind to see if I leave the ranch." Ruth's stomach tightened. Then he may find our tracks. He will. And follow us. Likely. She looked toward the open country behind them. The trail they had taken lay clear in the dust. Her decision suddenly felt visible to the whole world. Cole mounted with effort. We need to leave the main road. You know another way to Abilene. I know a worse way. That does not recommend it. It recommends it if men with better horses are waiting on the easy one. They turned north before the creek widened, following a narrow cattle path that climbed through pale grass and sandstone outcrops. The wind grew stronger on the ridge. It tugged at Ruth's bonnet and pressed her skirt against the saddle. Below them, the valley spread wide, gold and brown beneath a hard blue sky. For a moment, Ruth forgot the danger. She had lived less than a day's ride from this ridge for 9 years and had never seen her own country from this height. The Callahan ranch lay somewhere beyond the western folds, hidden now, no longer the whole world. The thought frightened her and freed her at the same time. Cole rode beside her. You all right? Ruth nodded. I did not know the land looked this wide from up here. It does that, he said. Makes a body feel small. Does that comfort you? Sometimes. Sometimes it reminds me I've made too much of my own ruin. Ruth looked at him. That sounds like a man who has had too much time alone. I have. So have I. The words settled quietly between them. They rode on until afternoon light slanted low. Cole's strength began to fail near a dry wash where sage grew thick along the banks. He tried to hide it by adjusting his hat and straightening in the saddle, but Ruth saw the gray cast in his face. We stop, she said. We have 2 more hours of light. And you have 10 minutes before you fall off that horse. I won't fall. No, because we are stopping. He looked ready to argue, then seemed to decide he had no spare strength for it. They led the horses down into the wash, where the banks blocked the wind. Ruth gathered brush while Cole checked the back trail from a rise. When he returned, she had a small fire started behind a screen of stones. He looked at it, then at her. Low flame, she said before he could speak. Little smoke. I am not new to being careful. I'm learning that. She heated coffee and split biscuits with a knife. Cole sat with his back against the bank, one hand pressed near the bandage. In the orange light of the fire, he looked less like the dangerous name on the wanted paper and more like a man who had outrun sleep for too long. Ruth handed him a cup. Tell me about Deputy Reed. Cole stared into the coffee. For a while, she thought he would refuse. Then he said he was younger than me. Ruth waited. Had a wife in Abilene, 1 little girl. He carried a ribbon in his pocket. Blue. Said his daughter tied it around his wrist before every trip so he would remember to come home. Cole swallowed, and the fire popped softly between them. When Pike's men cornered us, Reed told me to run the ledger through. I told him we both could make it. He laughed at me even then. Said I had spent too long around bad men if I thought the world handed out fair choices. Ruth looked down at her hands. Fair choices. The frontier did not hand out many of those. Cole's voice dropped lower. I left him because he ordered me to, but leaving a dying man, even for a reason, still feels like leaving. Ruth's anger toward him shifted shape. It did not vanish. It became something harder to name. Thomas died alone in a pasture, she said quietly. For months, I blamed myself for not finding him sooner, as if grief could turn back a clock if it punished me enough. Cole looked at her across the fire. Did it? He asked. No. Mine didn't either. The firelight moved over his face. For the first time, Ruth saw not only guilt there, but exhaustion from carrying guilt longer than any one man should. A sound cracked in the distance. Both of them froze. Not thunder, not a branch. A horse snorting. Cole reached for his gun. Ruth closed her hand around the shotgun beside her blanket. Above the wash, a shape moved against the last strip of sky. One rider. Watching. Then the shape vanished. Cole was on his feet too fast. Pain caught him, but fear pushed him through it. Ruth kicked dirt over the fire until darkness swallowed the glow. The night went silent around them. Cole leaned close, his voice barely more than breath. He found our trail. Ruth gripped the shotgun and looked up at the black ridge. For the first time, she understood that leaving home had not taken them away from danger. It had carried danger with them into the dark. The rider did not come down into the wash. That was the first mercy. The second was that the moon had not yet climbed high enough to silver the ground. Darkness still held close among the sage and dry grass, giving Ruth and Cole a thin kind of cover. They stood side by side below the bank, listening to the night breathe above them. Ruth could hear her own pulse in her ears. Cole's hand hovered near his revolver, but he did not draw. His face was turned upward, sharp and still, reading sounds Ruth could barely catch. A soft jingle, a horse shifting weight, the brush of a stirrup against leather. Then nothing. The waiting was worse than a shout. Ruth leaned close enough to whisper, "Is he alone?" "For now." "You sound certain." "I sound hopeful." That answer did not comfort her. Above them the horse snorted again, farther left this time. The rider was moving along the ridge, not leaving, watching for firelight, listening for horses, waiting for a careless sound. Ruth thought of her ranch, the kitchen table, the porch Thomas had built facing west. Those things felt very far away now. Less than a day's ride, but far enough that another Ruth seemed to live there. A woman who worried about fences and water channels, not men tracking her through darkness. Cole touched her elbow lightly. She looked at him. He pointed toward the horses, then down the wash. Ruth understood. Move quiet. No fire, no talking. Let the watcher stare at an empty camp. They worked in darkness, each motion slow and careful. Ruth tied the coffee tin in a cloth so it would not rattle. Cole gathered the bedroll with one hand, his jaw tight from pain. When he tried to lift the heavier saddlebag, Ruth took it from him without asking. He opened his mouth. She gave him a look. He closed it. Even then, with fear on every side, a small human thing passed between them. Not humor exactly, not ease, but the beginning of knowing how the other would behave when pressure came. They led the horses through the wash, hooves sinking into sand and dry leaves. Twice Juniper tossed her head, and Ruth pressed her cheek against the mare's neck, whispering low until the animal settled. Cole's black gelding followed with strange patience, as if he too understood that noise could turn the night against them. Behind them, the ridge stayed silent. They had gone perhaps a quarter mile when Cole stopped so suddenly, Ruth almost walked into him. "What?" she breathed. He crouched and touched the ground. Ruth saw nothing in the dark but pale dust and stone. Cole ran his fingers along the wash floor, then lifted them. Fresh tracks. "Our horses." "No." The cold inside Ruth deepened. Another rider. Not another. The same one came down earlier and doubled back. So he knows this wash. Yes. Then he may be ahead. Cole's silence answered. Ruth looked into the darkness in front of them. The wash curved between low banks, narrowing where a fallen cottonwood leaned across the channel. The place had seemed like shelter before. Now it felt like a throat closing. "What do we do?" she whispered. Cole looked at the banks, the horses, the narrow passage ahead. His breathing had grown heavier, though he tried to hide it. "We don't go where he expects." "There is another way." "There is always another way. It is usually worse." Ruth almost said she was beginning to dislike that rule, but fear kept the words in her throat. Cole led them up the right bank where loose dirt slid under their boots. Ruth pushed from behind while the horses scrambled, muffled by the sandy slope. At the top, the land opened into a field of broken rock and knee-high grass. The wind hit them hard, cold and dry. They mounted. Cole swayed when he settled into the saddle. Ruth saw it even in darkness. "You are bleeding again," she said. "Likely. You say that like weather. It feels less useful to say it like panic." Ruth pulled Juniper closer. "Cole." The sound of his name in her voice made him look at her. "You cannot fall behind," she said. "If you do, I will have to come back." "I won't ask you to." "I did not say you would ask." His eyes held hers through the dark. A quiet understanding moved there, dangerous in its own way. Not romance. Not yet. Something earlier. Something that said they were no longer two strangers caught in the same trouble. They had begun to become responsible for one another. That frightened Ruth more than the rider. They rode north under a sky crowded with stars. Cole kept them off the open ridge, following shallow cuts in the land and cattle paths too faint for any city man to read. Ruth did not ask how he knew such routes. Men who lived hunted learned the country differently than people who lived settled. After an hour, they reached an abandoned sod house sunk into a low hill. The roof had partly fallen in. The door hung crooked. A dead cottonwood stood beside it like an old hand raised in warning. Cole dismounted and nearly dropped to one knee. Ruth swung down at once. "Inside." "I need to check the back trail." "You need to sit before you meet the ground face first." "I'm still useful on my feet." "You will be more useful alive." He gave her a tired look. "Has anyone ever told you that you speak like a judge?" "My husband used to say I spoke like a fence post." Despite the danger, the words slipped out softly. Cole's expression changed. Ruth looked away first. They took the horses behind the rise and tied them where the dead cottonwood broke the wind. Inside the sod house, the air smelled of dirt, old smoke, and mice. Ruth found enough dry grass in one corner to make a place for Cole to sit. He resisted only until the bandage showed dark through his shirt. Then he stopped resisting. Ruth lit no fire. She worked by touch and starlight coming through the broken roof. When she peeled the bandage back, her fingers came away warm and wet. "You tore it," she said. "Climbing. Running from men who want you dead is hard on stitches." "I'll remember that for next time." "There had better not be a next time." Cole leaned his head back against the dirt wall and closed his eyes while she cleaned the wound again. She expected him to harden into silence, but after a while he spoke. "Deputy Reed's daughter was named Lily." Ruth paused. Cole kept his eyes closed. "He told me that while we were waiting in the line shack. Said she had lost 2 front teeth and spoke with a whistle. Said she wanted a red ribbon next because blue was for babies." Ruth wrapped the cloth around his ribs carefully. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because if I die before Abilene, someone should know why we were going." The words struck Ruth harder than she expected. She tied the bandage too tight, and Cole drew in a sharp breath. "Sorry," she said. "It's all right." "No, it is not." Her voice came out low but fierce. "Do not speak like dying is already a plan. I did not leave my land to carry your last words to a child I have never met." Cole opened his eyes. Ruth's hands were still on the bandage. In the broken starlight, his face looked stripped of every old defense. "I have watched one good man leave this world without warning," she said. "I will not sit politely while another one prepares to do the same." The sod house went very quiet. Cole swallowed. "You think I am a good man?" Ruth looked down at her hands, then back at him. "I think you are trying to become one. Some days that may be harder." For a long moment he did not speak. Then he said, "No one has said anything like that to me in years." Ruth stepped back and began folding the bloodied cloth, though there was no need to fold it so neatly. Her own words had surprised her. More than that, the feeling behind them had. Outside, the wind passed over the sod roof. A loose board tapped somewhere in the dark. Cole reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in oilcloth. He held it out. Ruth did not take it at first. "What is that?" "The other reason Pike wants me found." She took the bundle and opened it. Inside was a small brass key, tarnished and worn smooth at the edges. A strip of blue ribbon was tied through its ring. Ruth's breath caught. "Reed's key," she whispered. Cole nodded. He said the proof was hidden where his little girl kept the Sunday ribbon. I did not know what he meant, not fully, but the key opened something in Abilene, a trunk maybe, a desk, a strongbox. I have carried it since the night he died. Ruth held the key in her palm. It was small, almost weightless. Yet it seemed to carry a dead man's hope, a child's ribbon, and Cole's chance at a different life. From outside came a faint crack. A twig under a boot. Cole moved before Ruth could breathe. He caught her wrist and pulled her down beside him, close against the dirt wall. Another sound followed. Slow steps near the dead cottonwood. Someone had found the sod house. Ruth felt Cole's hand tighten around hers in the dark. Then a voice outside whispered, "Silas Vane, you in there?" The name slipped through the broken door like a knife. Cole did not answer. The brass key lay between Ruth's fingers, cold as winter. And the man outside stepped closer. The man outside waited for an answer. Ruth could feel Cole's breath held beside her in the dark. His hand still gripped her wrist, not hard enough to hurt, only hard enough to warn her not to move. The brass key lay cold inside her palm, the blue ribbon crushed between her fingers. "Silas Vane," the voice called again, softer this time. "I know you're in there." Cole's jaw tightened. Ruth heard the slow scrape of a boot near the doorway, then another. The man was not rushing in. That made him more dangerous. Foolish men charged. Careful men listened first. The sod house seemed to shrink around them. Broken roof, dirt walls, one crooked doorway, one small back gap where the wall had crumbled near the floor. Not enough for a horse, barely enough for a person to crawl through if fear made them thin. Cole leaned close to Ruth's ear. "Stay low." She nodded. Then he did something she did not expect. He pushed the brass key back into her hand and folded her fingers over it. "No matter what happens," he whispered, "keep that." Ruth wanted to say no. She wanted to tell him not to speak like a man already measuring his grave, but there was no time. The man outside stepped closer. "Pike said you'd run like a fox." He was right, but foxes still need holes. Cole shifted toward the door, moving slow despite the pain in his side. Ruth reached for the shotgun lying near her knee. The wooden stock felt familiar and terrible under her hand. "Who is he?" she whispered. Cole did not look back. "Nate Rusk." "The older one from the ranch." "Yes." "Is he fast?" Cole's eyes stayed on the doorway. "Fast enough." That was all the answer she needed. A shadow crossed the broken doorway. Cole spoke before the man could enter. "Rusk." The shadow stopped. "Well," Rusk said, and Ruth could hear a smile in the voice. "There you are. Pike figured you'd be halfway to Abilene by now." "I am tired of hearing what Pike figures." "You should have stayed tired. Men who get ideas past their station tend to die with confused faces." Ruth pressed her back against the dirt wall. Through the dim opening she could see only part of Rusk's shape, a shoulder, a hat brim, the edge of a rifle. Cole stood in the middle of the room, revolver drawn but low. His body looked steady, yet Ruth saw the truth in the way his weight favored one side. If this turned bad, he did not have much strength to spend. Rusk's gaze shifted past Cole. Ruth knew he had seen her. "Widow's still with you," Rusk said. "That's poor manners, Silas, dragging a woman into your hanging." Cole's voice stayed calm. "She has nothing to do with this." That stopped being true when she lied to Wade Barlow with a shotgun in her hands. Ruth's fingers tightened. Rusk took one step inside. Moonlight caught the gray in his beard. His face was narrow, weathered, and unreadable, the kind of face that had learned to show no more than it wished. "Mrs. Callahan," he said, "you ought to walk out now. Take your mare and go back to your ranch. This man is not worth what will happen if you stand beside him." Ruth did not answer. "Listen to him," Cole said quietly. That made Ruth look at him. For one moment, anger rose hotter than fear. He had no right to decide courage for her, no right to hand her safety like a dismissal. But under that anger she heard something else in his voice. Not command, pleading. He wanted her safe, even if it meant being alone with death. Rusk chuckled. "See, even he knows." Ruth lifted the shotgun from her lap, still low, still hidden by shadow. "I have had many men tell me what I ought to do," she said. "It has rarely improved my day." Rusk turned his head toward her fully now. "You got spirit, I'll grant that." "I did not ask for your grant." Cole's mouth tightened, as if he might almost smile, if the moment were not so deadly. Rusk's rifle shifted a little. "Pike doesn't want you dead tonight, Silas. He wants the key and whatever Reed told you. Give it over and maybe Mrs. Callahan rides home before sunrise." "You know Pike better than that," Cole said. "Yes," Rusk replied, "I do." That was the first honest thing Ruth had heard from him. A silence settled. Outside, one of the horses stamped. Juniper, Ruth thought, nervous, close to the dead cottonwood, too close. If the horses bolted, they would be trapped on foot. Rusk glanced toward the sound. Cole moved. It happened so fast Ruth barely followed it. Cole swung his revolver up, not firing, only forcing Rusk to shift back toward the door. Rusk raised his rifle. Ruth rose from the shadows with the shotgun already at her shoulder. "Drop it," she said. Rusk froze. The room held 3 breaths, 3 weapons, and one terrible choice. Ruth had never pointed a gun at a man's chest from such a short distance. Her arms trembled, but not enough to move the barrel away. She saw Rusk notice the tremble. She saw him weigh it. Cole saw it too. "Don't test her," he said. Rusk's eyes moved from Ruth to Cole. "You think she'll pull that trigger?" "I think she is buried enough to know what more loss costs." The words struck Ruth in the heart, but she did not lower the gun. Rusk smiled slowly. "That almost sounds like a man who found something." Cole did not answer. That silence was answer enough. Rusk's face hardened. Then from somewhere outside, a second voice called through the dark. "Nate!" Ruth's blood went cold. Cole's eyes flicked toward the door. Rusk had not come alone. The call came again, closer now. "Nate, you find him." Rusk smiled. Ruth understood the trap at the same moment Cole did. Rusk had held them in place while another man circled. Cole stepped back toward Ruth, back wall. Rusk's rifle jerked upward. Ruth fired. The blast filled the sod house with smoke and thunder. She had aimed low, toward the doorway frame and the dirt at Rusk's feet, not his body. Splinters of rotten wood and packed earth burst up between them. Rusk cursed and stumbled back into the dark. Cole grabbed Ruth's arm. "Move." They dropped to the floor and crawled toward the crumbled gap in the back wall. Ruth's ears rang so hard the world seemed underwater. Smoke burned her throat. The shotgun dragged in her hand. The key bit into her palm. Cole pushed the bedroll through first, then Ruth. She scraped her shoulder against hard dirt, kicked once, and slid out into cold grass behind the sod house. A shot cracked from the front. Dirt jumped above her head. Cole came through after her, face tight with pain. The wound had opened again. She could see the darkness spreading along his shirt even in the moonlight. "No," Ruth whispered. "Later." "There may not be later if you keep saying later." He caught her hand, pulling her low toward the dead cottonwood. Horses. They ran bent over, more stumble than run. Juniper pulled against her rope, eyes wide. Cole's black gelding tossed his head but held. Ruth untied both with shaking fingers while Cole turned and fired once toward the front of the sod house. Not at a man, but high enough to make anyone duck. "Ride north," he said. "You. With you. Then mount." Cole tried. His leg lifted, his hand gripped the saddle horn, and his body failed him. He dropped against the gelding's side with a sound he could not hide. Ruth moved fast, shoving her shoulder under his arm. "Again. I'll slow you down. You already are, mount." He looked at her then, and in his eyes she saw pain, shame, and something rower than both. "Trust." He tried again. This time she pushed with all the strength grief and ranch work had left in her. Cole swung into the saddle and nearly folded over the horn, but he stayed mounted. Behind them, Rusk shouted, "They're running." Ruth climbed onto Juniper, slapped Cole's gelding on the rump, and drove both horses into the open dark. Shots cracked behind them, none close enough to matter but close enough to chase the breath from her chest. The horses plunged through grass and sage, up a low rise and down the other side, where moonlight spilled across broken ground. Cole rode beside her, hunched and silent. "Too silent." "Cole," Ruth called. "I'm here." The answer was thin. They rode until the sod house vanished behind the ridges. They rode until the gunshots were gone, until only hoofbeats and hard breathing filled the night. At last, near a line of shallow gullies, Cole reached for the saddle horn and swayed. Ruth saw him slipping. She grabbed his coat sleeve from her saddle. "Stay with me." He turned his head, eyes unfocused. "Ruth." It was the first time he had said her name, without Mrs. Callahan wrapped around it. Something inside her broke open. "Do not do that," she said, her voice shaking now. "Do not say my name like goodbye." But Cole's hand loosened. The black gelding slowed. Ruth pulled both horses into the shelter of the gully, just as Cole slid from the saddle and fell hard into the dust. She was on the ground before he stopped moving. The blue ribbon key was still clenched in her hand. Cole lay still beneath the moon, his blood dark against the pale dirt, while far behind them, somewhere in the night, the men who hunted him began to follow again. Cole did not wake when Ruth called his name. That frightened her more than the shots had. She knelt in the shallow gully with one hand pressed against the bandage at his side and the other still closed around Deputy Reed's brass key. Moonlight lay thin over the broken earth. The horses stood a few yards away, breathing hard, reins hanging loose. Behind them, the night looked empty, but Ruth knew empty land could hide a man with patience and a gun. "Cole," she said again, sharper this time. His lashes moved. Not enough. His blood had soaked through the fresh cloth and warmed her palm. Ruth swallowed the fear rising in her throat. Fear was useless unless it taught the hands to move faster. She had learned that after Thomas died, when crying had not milked cows, mended fences, or brought hay in before rain. So she pushed the panic down and worked. She pulled the bedroll from Juniper's saddle, tore a strip from the cleanest blanket, and pressed it hard over the wound. Cole groaned then, a low sound dragged from deep in his chest. "Good," Ruth whispered. "Be angry if you want, just stay here." His eyes opened halfway. "Ruth. I told you not to say my name like goodbye." He tried to focus on her face. "Did we lose them?" For the moment, that means no. It means hush. The corner of his mouth moved, but no smile came. His skin felt too warm. His breathing came shallow, each breath catching at the ribs. Ruth knew enough to know that if fever found him before Abilene, the brass key might reach the truth with no man left to clear. She looked up at the sky. The stars were bright and pitiless. Dawn was still hours away. They needed shelter. They needed water. They needed a doctor. They had none of those things. Then Juniper lifted her head and nickered softly. Ruth turned. Far off to the northeast, beyond the low ridge, a faint orange glow trembled against the dark. Not sunrise, too low, too small. A lamp in a window, maybe, or a campfire. Cole saw her looking and tried to rise. She pushed him back. No. There could be men. There could also be a roof. Ruth. She leaned over him, suddenly angry in a way that had nowhere else to go. You do not get to bleed on my hands and then give orders from the dirt. His eyes held hers, fever-bright and tired. Then he whispered, "Yes, ma'am." The small surrender nearly undid her. It took all of Ruth's strength to get him mounted again. Cole helped when he could, which was less than he wanted and more than she expected. Twice he almost slipped. Twice she braced her shoulder beneath his arm and pushed until her back burned. When he finally settled into the saddle, he bent forward over the horn, one hand tangled in the gelding's mane. Ruth tied his reins to Juniper's saddle and led both horses toward the orange glow. The ride felt longer than any road she had ever taken. The land rose and fell in dark waves. Thorn brush clawed at her skirt. Once, an owl burst from a fence post and made Juniper shy sideways, dragging the black gelding half a step with her. Cole did not lift his head. Ruth kept talking to him. Not because she knew what to say. Because silence felt too much like losing. "You told me Deputy Reed's daughter wanted a red ribbon," she said, leading the horses through a narrow cut between rocks. "When this is done, someone ought to buy her one." Cole's voice came faintly. "She may hate me. She may. I brought her father into it. Her father chose the truth." "So did mine once," Cole murmured. Ruth looked back. "Your father." Cole's head shifted against the saddle horn. For a moment she thought he had drifted out again. Then his voice came, thin and rough. "My father refused to sign over land in Tennessee after the war. Men burned our barn. He tried to rebuild with nothing. Died before the roof went up." Ruth slowed. Cole had spoken of his past in pieces, always like a man handing over broken boards instead of a whole house. This was the first time she saw the boy behind the gunman. "How old were you?" she asked. 15. "And your mother?" "Gone by then." The night seemed to widen around them. "No land," he said. "No kin. No one asking what kind of work a hungry boy takes if the man offering it has silver in his hand and wrong in his heart." Ruth did not answer quickly. There were easy words people used for hard lives. She had heard them in church, in town, at funerals. They rarely helped. At last she said, "That explains the road. It does not excuse every step." Cole's eyes opened a little. "No," he whispered, "that is why I told you." The orange glow grew clearer. A small cabin stood tucked near a stand of cottonwoods beside a dry creek bed. One window burned with lamplight. A mule stood in a corral. Smoke trailed from a low chimney. Not a gang camp, not from the look of it. Ruth stopped before leaving the cover of the brush. "Can you sit straight?" she asked. Cole tried. His face tightened and he nearly folded again. "That answers that." She dismounted, took the shotgun, and walked toward the cabin with the horses behind her. The door opened before she reached the porch. An old woman stood there in a dark shawl, holding a lantern high. Her hair was white and braided over one shoulder. Her face was lined but sharp, with eyes that missed little. "If you aim that scattergun at me, child," the woman said, "I'll be offended before I'm scared." Ruth stopped. "My friend is hurt." The old woman lifted the lantern higher. Light fell across Cole's bent form, the blood on his shirt and Ruth's torn sleeve. "Friend is he?" Ruth heard the question inside the question. "He is under my care." "That is not the same answer." "It is the one I have." The old woman studied her for a long second. Then she stepped back from the door. "Bring him in before he falls off and breaks what is not already broken." Ruth nearly sagged with relief. The woman's name was Martha Bell, and she moved with the calm speed of someone who had seen too much blood to be impressed by it. She cleared a table near the stove, sent Ruth for water, and cut away Cole's bandage with a knife so sharp Ruth barely saw the blade move. "This man was stitched once already," Martha said. "I did it," Ruth answered. "Could be worse." "Is that praise?" "It is frontier praise. Take it while it is warm." Ruth held Cole's shoulder while Martha cleaned the wound. Cole came awake when the carbolic touched him, his hand jerking toward a gun that was not there. Ruth caught his wrist. "You are safe," she said. His eyes found hers. "You sure?" "No," she said, "but I am here." That seemed to reach him. He stopped fighting the pain and let his head turn toward her hand on his wrist. Martha noticed. Of course she did. She said nothing. When the wound was cleaned and wrapped again, Martha made Ruth drink coffee with molasses stirred in. Ruth had not realized how badly her hands were shaking until the cup rattled against her teeth. "You running from law or outlaws?" Martha asked. Ruth looked at Cole. He was half asleep on the cot now, face pale in the lamplight. "Both, depending who is telling the story," Ruth said. Martha nodded as if that answer made perfect sense. Truth often enters a room last. Ruth reached into her pocket and touched the brass key. "I need to get to Abilene," she said. "There may be proof there that clears him. And men coming after it." "Yes." Martha poured more coffee. "Then you won't go by the main road." "No. You won't outrun them with him in that state." "I know." Martha sat across from her, lantern light deepening the lines around her eyes. "There's a freight wagon leaving my cousin's place at first light. It runs east with flour sacks and feed barrels. Slow, plain, not worth robbing unless a man is very bored." Ruth leaned forward. "Can it get us near Abilene?" "Near enough, but there is a price." Ruth reached for her coin pouch. Martha waved it away. "Not that kind." "What kind?" "You tell me whether the man on that cot is worth the risk you are taking." Ruth looked toward Cole. His face in sleep was different. Younger. No guarded eyes, no careful answers, no old name standing between him and the world. Just a wounded man who had carried a dead deputy's key because no one else could. "I do not know yet," Ruth said honestly. Martha watched her. Then Ruth added quieter, "But I know he is worth the truth." The old woman smiled faintly. "That will do." Near dawn, Ruth sat beside Cole's cot while Martha slept in a chair by the stove. The cabin had gone gray with early light. Cole stirred once, and Ruth leaned closer. "Ruth," he whispered. "I'm here." His eyes opened, clearer now, though still tired. "You should have left me in the gully." "No. You would have been safer." "Maybe." "Then why didn't you?" Ruth looked down at the blue ribbon tied to the brass key in her palm. She thought of Thomas's grave, Deputy Reed's daughter, her own kitchen with the hidden second cup, and the long months when she had mistaken being alone for being safe. Then she looked back at Cole. "Because safety is not the same as living." Cole's eyes held hers, and something quiet passed between them that neither was ready to name. Outside, a wagon bell rang once in the morning air. Martha opened one eye from her chair. "Freight's here." Ruth stood and slipped the brass key deep into the hem pocket of her skirt. Then she crossed to the window. A wagon waited near the cottonwoods, piled high with flour sacks. A broad-shouldered driver sat on the bench, reins in hand. At first it looked like their way forward. Then Ruth saw the man beside the wagon. Lean brown coat. Pale shifting eyes. Wade Barlow stood in Martha Bell's yard, smiling up at the cabin window as if he had been expecting her all along. Wade Barlow smiled like a man who had already counted his winnings. Ruth stood at Martha Bell's cabin window with one hand on the curtain and the other near the brass key hidden in her skirt. Morning light spread thin across the yard. The freight wagon sat by the cottonwoods, loaded with flour sacks and feed barrels, its mule team stamping in the cold. The driver held the reins but did not look comfortable. Beside the wagon, Barlow stood in his lean brown coat with his pale eyes fixed on the cabin. He raised 2 fingers to the brim of his hat. A polite greeting. A warning. Behind Ruth, Cole slept on the narrow cot, his face pale but no longer gray. Martha had given him willow bark tea and something bitter from a small brown bottle. He needed hours of rest, maybe days. They had minutes. Martha Bell came up beside Ruth and looked through the window. "Well," the old woman said, "that is an ugly thing to see before breakfast." "You know him." "I know the kind." Outside, Barlow spoke to the wagon driver. The driver shook his head once, but Barlow leaned close and said something that made the man's shoulders fall. Then Barlow turned toward the cabin door. Ruth's mouth went dry. "He cannot find Cole here." Martha looked back at the cot. "Then he won't. You have a place to hide him." "I have lived alone for 20 years, child. I have places to hide silver, flour, medicine, and once, a Methodist preacher during a hailstorm. I can hide a wounded man." Ruth almost laughed, but fear swallowed it. Martha moved fast. She pulled a rag rug aside near the stove and lifted a trap board Ruth had not noticed. Beneath it was a shallow storage space, not high enough for a man to sit, but enough for Cole to lie flat if he could bear the pain. Ruth crossed to him and touched his shoulder. "Cole." His eyes opened slowly. For one soft second he looked only at her, and the danger outside seemed to fade from his face. "Ruth." "Barlow is here." That woke him fully. He tried to rise and gasped when his wound pulled. Ruth pressed him down. "No, Martha has a hiding place. I won't lie under a floor while you face him. You will if you want the key to reach Abilene." His eyes sharpened at the word key. Martha came to the cot. "Help him up. No speeches. Men bleeding through my quilts have no right to speeches." Between the 2 women, they got Cole to the storage space. He lowered himself with tight, silent control, though sweat broke across his forehead. Ruth folded a blanket beneath his head and pressed her hand briefly against his cheek before she could stop herself. His eyes caught hers. There were things in that look neither of them could afford to say. Martha lowered the board, rolled the rug back over it, and kicked a small basket of kindling on top. By the time Barlow knocked, the cabin looked like any other lonely woman's home at morning. Martha opened the door before he knocked twice. "If you hit my door like a taxman," she said, "I'll make you stand outside till noon." Barlow blinked, then smiled. "Morning, Mrs. Bell." "Miss Bell." "My mistake." "It usually is." His smile thinned. "I'm looking for 2 travelers, a widow and a wounded man." Martha leaned on the doorframe. "You found an old woman in a bad mood." Barlow's gaze moved past her to Ruth. "Mrs. Callahan," he said warmly, You are farther from home than I expected." Ruth stood near the table, both hands wrapped around a coffee cup so he could not see them shake. "I could say the same." I followed concern. "You wear it poorly." Barlow stepped inside without being invited. Martha's eyes narrowed, but she let him. 2 more men appeared in the yard behind him. Not Nate Rusk, not the thick rider from before. New faces. Pike had more hands than Ruth liked to imagine. Barlow removed his hat and looked around the cabin. 1 cot, 1 stove, 1 table, 3 cups. Ruth saw his eyes pause there. 3 cups. Her heart kicked. Martha saw it too. Without missing a beat, she reached for the 3rd cup, poured coffee into it, and drank from it herself. "I like 1 hot and 1 cooling," she said. "At my age, I am allowed strange habits." Barlow smiled. "I did not ask." "You were about to." He turned toward Ruth. "Where is Silas?" "I told you before, I do not know a Silas." "Cole Mercer, then. Does that name sit prettier?" Ruth held his stare. "You seem to know more names than honest work." One of the men outside laughed under his breath. Barlow's eyes flicked to him, and the laugh died. Barlow walked slowly across the room. His boots passed within 2 feet of the rug. Ruth felt every step inside her chest. Beneath that floor, Cole lay wounded, trapped, and listening. "You know what your trouble is, Mrs. Callahan," Barlow said. "You believe courage makes you safe." "No," Ruth said. "I believe cowardice makes a person useful to men like you." Martha's eyebrows lifted slightly, as if Ruth had surprised even her. Barlow stopped near the stove. The toe of his boot touched the edge of the rag rug. Ruth could not breathe. He looked down, then back up. "Mercer Pike is not a patient man," he said softly. "He wants the key." Ruth kept her face blank. Barlow watched closely. Too closely. "He wants the dead deputy's proof. And he wants Silas vein buried under the right story before some judge starts reading papers that should have stayed lost." Martha crossed her arms. "You came all this way to confess." Barlow turned on her with a flash of anger. "Old woman, you best remember who you are talking to." "I do, that is why I am bored." For a moment, Ruth thought he might strike her. Instead, Barlow smiled again, but the mask had cracked. "The freight wagon is not leaving." Ruth's grip tightened around the cup. "I spoke to the driver," he said. "Road east has riders on it. Road west has riders too. Any woman traveling with a wounded man will be stopped. Any wagon carrying hidden cargo will be emptied." Martha's face gave away nothing. Ruth thought of the brass key in her skirt. Abilene felt suddenly farther than the moon. Barlow stepped closer to Ruth. "But you can still walk out of this clean. Give me the key." "I do not have it." His gaze dropped to her skirt pocket. Ruth felt cold pass through her. Barlow had guessed. Or he had seen too much through the window. He reached out. Martha lifted a kettle from the stove. "Touch her, and you will wear boiling coffee to church." Barlow's hand stopped halfway. The room held still. Then a sound came from outside. A wagon bell. Once. Then twice. The driver shouted, "Company on the South Trail." Barlow turned sharply. Ruth moved to the window. A rider was coming hard across the open ground, coat flying, hat pulled low. Dust streamed behind his horse. For one wild heartbeat, Ruth feared more of Pike's men. Then Martha whispered, "That is my cousin." The rider reached the yard and swung down before his horse stopped. He was broad, red-faced from cold and breathing hard. "Martha," he called, "Marshall's patrol is less than a mile behind me. They found bodies at the old sod place and tracks leading here." Barlow's face went white with fury. Ruth's stomach turned at the word bodies, but the man spoke too fast for her to ask. Federal Marshal, Martha said. The cousin nodded, out of Abilene looking for Pike riders. Barlow moved toward the door. Ruth stepped into his path before wisdom could stop her. You are leaving. His eyes burned. Move. You seemed eager to search. His hand dropped toward his gun. From beneath the floor came one hard knock. Everyone froze. Ruth's heart nearly stopped. Cole. Barlow heard it. His eyes snapped to the rug. Martha swung the hot kettle before he could move. Barlow cursed and stumbled back as boiling coffee splashed across his sleeve, not his skin, but enough to break the moment. Ruth grabbed the shotgun from beside the table and raised it. Outside, Martha's cousin shouted, "Riders coming." Barlow backed toward the door, hate twisting his face. This is not over. Ruth's voice came out steady, though her hands shook. It is getting closer. He ran. His men mounted fast. Hooves tore up Martha's yard as they fled north, away from the south trail and the approaching law. Ruth stood with the shotgun raised until the sound faded. Then she dropped to her knees and pulled the rug away. Cole lay beneath the trapboard, teeth clenched, eyes open, one hand pressed to his wound. You knocked, Ruth said, half angry, half trembling. He was going to look, Cole whispered. You could have ruined everything. I know. Martha's cousin called again from outside. Marshall's nearly here. Ruth looked at Cole. He looked back at her, and she knew what he was thinking before he said it. Lawmen were coming. That should have meant safety. But Cole was still a wanted man under the name Silas Vane, with no proof yet in hand, and Barlow riding loose with the truth half within reach. Ruth closed her fingers around the brass key in her pocket. If this moment touched your heart, stay with the story, because the truth is finally close, but one wrong word can still destroy them both. Outside, the first marshal's horse came into the yard, and Ruth Callahan stepped toward the door, carrying the only key that could save the wounded man behind her. The federal marshal who rode into Martha Bell's yard did not look like rescue. He looked tired. His coat was dusty from hard travel, his beard was 2 days past neat, and his eyes carried the dull sharpness of a man who had spent too many years arriving after harm was already done. 2 deputies rode behind him, both young, both watchful. Their horses were lathered. Their rifles stayed in saddle scabbards, but their hands never drifted far. Ruth stood on Martha's porch with the shotgun lowered at her side. Martha Bell stood beside her with both arms crossed, still smelling faintly of spilled coffee. Her cousin remained near the wagon, looking between the lawmen and the north trail where Barlow had fled. The marshal dismounted slowly. "Ma'am," he said, "Marshal Elias Rourke out of Abilene." Ruth said nothing. His gaze moved from her torn sleeve to the shotgun, then to the cabin door behind her. "We're looking for a wounded man known as Silas Vane." Ruth felt the brass key heavy in her skirt pocket. Martha spoke first. "Known by who?" The marshal looked at her. "Miss Bell." "Martha, if you aim to ask questions under my roof." A tired corner of his mouth moved. "Martha." That small familiarity surprised Ruth. Martha did not smile, but her shoulders lowered half an inch. "You know him?" Ruth asked. "Long enough to trust he can still be wrong," Martha said. Marshal Rourke accepted that without offense. "We found 2 dead horses near the old sod place west of here and blood sign in the dirt. Also found tracks from 3 men riding north hard. Your cousin says Pike men were in this yard." "They were," Martha said. "Was Wade Barlow one of them?" "Yes." Rourke's jaw tightened. "Then time is short." Ruth stepped forward. "Why?" "Because Barlow does not run unless he has somewhere worse to go." The words struck the yard flat. Cole was inside, hidden poorly now beneath a blanket on Martha's cot. There had been no time to move him back under the floor. If Rourke stepped past Ruth and looked, the wanted notice would rise again between them like a grave marker. Ruth held the marshal's eyes. "I know where Sela's vein is," she said. One deputy stiffened. The other reached toward his saddle rifle. Rourke lifted one hand, stopping both. "Then you had better tell me carefully." "His name is Cole Mercer." The marshal's face did not change, but something passed through his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or doubt. "That is a name I have not heard in some years," he said. "You know it." "I knew of a boy named Cole Mercer out of Tennessee. He rode with bad company under a worse name." "He did," Ruth said, "and now he is trying to put right what he can." "Many men say that when law catches up." Ruth took the wanted notice from her pocket and held it out. "Then read what someone wrote at the bottom." Rourke took the paper. His eyes moved over the printed charges, then stopped at the handwritten line. "Not guilty of Reed's death. Proof hidden in Abilene." The marshal's expression changed this time. "Where did you get this?" "From Cole." "Where did he get it?" "Deputy Reed." The yard went still at the dead man's name. Marshal Rourke folded the notice carefully. "Deputy Amos Reed was my friend." Ruth's throat tightened. She had expected suspicion, maybe anger. She had not expected grief. "He had a daughter," she said, "Lily." Rourke looked up sharply. "She tied blue ribbon around his wrist," Ruth continued. "He wanted her to know he tried to come home." The marshal's face hardened, but not at Ruth, at the pain of hearing a true thing. The cabin door creaked behind her. Cole stood inside the doorway with one hand gripping the frame and the other pressed to his bandaged side. His face was pale as old linen, his hair damp with fever, but his eyes were clear enough to meet the marshal's. "Rourke," he said. One deputy drew his revolver. Ruth lifted the shotgun before thinking. "Put that away," Rourke snapped. The deputy froze. The marshal looked at Cole, Sela's vein. Cole's jaw tightened. "Cole Mercer." "That depends on the papers." "It depends on the truth." Rourke walked toward the porch, stopping at the bottom step. "Did you kill Amos Reed?" "No." "Did you leave him?" Cole closed his eyes for one breath. "Yes." Ruth felt the answer cut through the morning. Rourke's face darkened. Cole opened his eyes again. "He ordered me to draw Pike's men off. I came back when I could. He was still breathing. He gave me the key and told me where the rest was hidden, but he did not have time to say it plain." Rourke's voice dropped. "What key?" Ruth reached into the hem pocket of her skirt. The brass key came out, with the blue ribbon still tied through its ring. Marshal Rourke stared at it, as if Ruth had placed a ghost in her palm. "That ribbon," he said quietly. "Deputy Reed's daughter tied it," Ruth said. Rourke reached for the key, then stopped. He did not take it from her hand, not yet. "Where did Amos say the proof was?" Cole swallowed hard. "Where Lily keeps the Sunday ribbon." Rourke shut his eyes. Martha's cousin removed his hat. Even the deputies seemed to understand that something had shifted. "His house," Rourke said. Ruth stepped closer. "You know what it means." "Lily kept her ribbons in a little cedar box on top of her mother's sewing chest," Rourke said. "Amos used to joke that the safest vault in Kansas was any place his daughter said was hers." Cole gripped the doorframe harder. "Then the proof is there." "Maybe," Rourke said, "if Pike has not found it." "Barlow may be riding there now," Ruth said. Rourke turned toward the North Trail. His tiredness vanished beneath purpose. "How long since he left?" "Minutes," Martha said. "Then we ride." Cole stepped off the porch. Ruth caught his arm before he took the second step. "You cannot even stand straight." "I can ride." No. Ruth. No. The word came out so firm that even the marshal looked at her. Cole's eyes burned with frustration. If that proof is found and I am not there, if that proof is found and you fall dead in the road, what good does that do Lily Reed? What good does it do you? Cole's face tightened at Lily's name. Rourke looked between them, then spoke. She is right. Cole turned on him. You want me in chains. I want Amos Reed's killer exposed. Rourke's gaze did not soften. If that is Pike, then I want Pike. If it is you, then I want you. Either way, bleeding out on the trail helps no one. Ruth expected Cole to argue again. Instead, his eyes lowered to the key in her hand. You take it, he said. Ruth looked at him. Go with Rourke, Cole said. You heard enough, you know enough. And Barlow has seen you with it, which means he will expect me to carry it now. That may buy you one small edge. I am not leaving you. His voice softened. You already saved me once because you would not leave. Now save me by going. The words settled between them, with a weight Ruth could hardly bear. Behind her the marshal waited. The deputies shifted in their saddles. The freight wagon mule flicked its ears. The whole morning seemed to hold still, waiting for Ruth Callahan to choose again. She looked at Cole, the wounded stranger who had come to her barn with a false name, the man who had carried shame like a second gun, the man who had told her truth piece by piece, not to make himself clean, but because he could not bear one more lie, the man who had said her name in the moonlight as if it was the last honest thing he had left. You will stay here, she said. Cole nodded once. You will let Martha tend that wound. Yes. You will not try to follow. His silence was answer enough. Ruth stepped closer until only the porch rail stood between them. Cole Mercer, if I ride to Abilene carrying this key, you had better be alive when I come back with the truth. His eyes held hers. I will try. That is too weak. For the first time that day, a faint smile touched his mouth. I will be alive. Ruth wanted to touch his face. She did not. Not in front of the marshal, the deputies, Martha, and the wide watching morning. Instead, she placed the blue ribbon key inside her glove and closed her fist tight. If you believe one brave choice can change a life, stay with Ruth now, because the next ride will decide whether Cole's name is cleared or buried forever. Marshal Rourke helped Ruth onto Juniper. One deputy took the lead. The other rode behind. Rourke kept beside her, not in front, as if he understood that the key made her part of the law now, whether the badge showed it or not. As they left Martha's yard, Ruth looked back once. Cole stood in the cabin doorway, one hand against the frame, the morning light pale around him. Martha was already reaching to pull him back inside, scolding him with her eyes. Ruth lifted her hand. Cole lifted his. Then the road bent, and he was gone. They rode hard toward Abilene. The land blurred into wind, dust, and hoofbeats. Ruth had never pushed Juniper so fast for so long, but the little mare gave everything. Rourke's face stayed set toward the east. Twice he sent a deputy ahead to scout. Twice the deputy returned with bad news. Fresh tracks. 3 riders. Moving fast. By late afternoon, the roofs of Abilene appeared beyond the rise, low and smoky beneath a gray sky. Church steeple, water tower, livery stable, the railroad line cutting dark across the edge of town. Rourke pointed toward a small white house past the marshal's office, Reed's place. Ruth's heart beat hard. They were close. Too close for mercy, to be certain. As they thundered down the street, people turned from boardwalks and doorways. A dog barked. A woman dropped a basket. Ruth saw the little white house ahead, saw the front door standing half open, saw a small red ribbon tied to the porch rail. Then a child screamed inside. Marshal Rourke drew his revolver and spurred forward. Ruth tightened her fist around the brass key. They had reached the truth. But Wade Barlow had reached it first. The scream from Deputy Reed's house cut through Abilene like a blade through cloth. Marshal Rourke reached the porch first. Ruth came close behind, Juniper skidding in the dust as she pulled the mare up hard. The front door stood open, bumping softly against the inside wall. A red ribbon was tied to the porch rail, bright against the white paint, twisting in the cold afternoon wind. Inside, a little girl cried again. "Lily!" Rourke shouted. Ruth was off the horse before she remembered moving. Her boots hit the ground hard. The brass key pressed into her gloved palm. One deputy ran around the side of the house. The other stayed near the street, eyes on the alleys and rooftops. Rourke entered with his revolver drawn low. Ruth followed with the shotgun. The little front room had been torn apart. Chair overturned, Bible on the floor, sewing basket spilled across the rug. Thread, buttons, cloth scraps, and ribbons lay scattered like someone had shaken a small, gentle life until it broke open. A woman in a dark dress knelt near the hearth, holding a child against her chest. Lily Reed could not have been more than 6. Her face was wet with tears. One front tooth was missing, just as Cole had said. In one small hand she clutched a torn strip of red ribbon. The woman looked up at Rourke with terror in her eyes. He took the box. Rourke's face hardened. "Who?" "The man in the brown coat. He said Amos stole from bad men, and if we had any sense, we would forget his name." Ruth felt the room tilt beneath her. Barlow had the box. The key was still in her hand, but the lock it opened was gone. Rourke turned toward the door. "Which way?" The woman pointed with a shaking hand. "Back alley. He had another man with him." Rourke moved fast. "Stay with them," he told one deputy. Ruth stepped after him. "Mrs. Callahan, no." She held up the brass key. "You need this." His eyes dropped to it, then to her face. There was no time to argue. "Stay behind me." "That seems unlikely." He gave her one grim look, then ran. They cut through the back of the house into a narrow alley that smelled of coal smoke, mud, and horses. Fresh boot marks tore through the damp ground. At the far end, someone had knocked over a wash bucket. Water ran in a thin line toward the street. A man shouted near the railroad yard. Rourke broke into a run. Ruth followed, skirts gathered in one hand, shotgun in the other. The key burned in her fist. Her lungs ached. Abilene blurred around her in flashes. Boardwalks, storefronts, a woman pulling a child out of the way, men turning from the saloon doors, the sharp whistle of a train waiting at the edge of town. Then she saw Wade Barlow. He was near the freight platform, one hand gripping a small cedar box, the other holding a revolver low at his side. The man with him dragged a saddled horse away from a hitching post. Barlow saw the marshal and cursed. "Stop there," Rourke called. Barlow did not stop. He shoved the cedar box into his coat and ran for the horse. Rourke fired once into the ground near Barlow's boots. Dirt jumped. Barlow spun, grabbed a young stable hand by the collar and pulled him close. The yard froze. "Next one makes me nervous," Barlow shouted, pressing his revolver near the boy's side. "And this child pays for your courage." Ruth stopped so suddenly her boots slid. The boy could not have been more than 14. His face had gone white. His cap lay in the mud. Rourke held his revolver steady, but did not fire. Barlow's eyes found Ruth. Even cornered, he smiled. "You should have stayed on your ranch, widow." Ruth's hands tightened around the shotgun. She could not raise it, not with the boy in front of him. Barlow backed toward the horse. "Toss the key." Rourke said, "Don't." Barlow pressed the boy harder. "Toss it, or you explain to his mother why a dead deputy mattered more than her son." Ruth looked at the boy's trembling mouth, then at the cedar box inside Barlow's coat, then at the brass key in her palm. For one terrible second, she was back at Thomas's grave, understanding that the world did not ask fair questions. It asked impossible ones and waited to see what kind of person stood up under them. Ruth slowly lifted her hand. Barlow's smile widened, but she did not throw the key to him. She threw it left. Hard. It flashed in the gray afternoon light and landed near the railroad platform, skidding under the edge of a flour cart. Barlow's eyes snapped toward it. That was all Ruth needed. The marshal lunged forward, grabbing the boy and pulling him down as Barlow fired wild. The shot cracked above them and shattered a crate. Ruth raised the shotgun and fired into the wagon wheel beside Barlow, not at him. The blast split wood and sent the horse rearing backward. Barlow stumbled. The second deputy came from the side and tackled the man with the horse. Ruth was already on Barlow before he could steady himself. They hit the mud hard. Barlow fought like a trapped wolf, but Ruth was heavier, angrier, and done with waiting. Within moments, Barlow's revolver slid across the yard and a deputy's boot pinned it down. Ruth stood frozen, smoke curling from the shotgun barrel. The boy scrambled away sobbing. Barlow lay in the mud with Ruth's knee against his back, and iron cuffs closing around his wrists. "This is not over," Barlow spat. Ruth leaned close. "Men like you always say that when the ending finally arrives." Ruth moved to the flour cart and dropped to her knees. Her hands shook as she reached beneath it. For one sick moment, she felt only mud and gravel. Then her fingers closed around the brass key. She turned back. Ruth pulled the cedar box from inside Barlow's coat and carried it to a crate near the platform. Its lid was scratched. A little flower had been carved into one corner, likely by Deputy Reed's own hand. Ruth imagined Lily keeping ribbons inside it, never knowing her father had hidden truth beneath childhood color. Ruth looked at Ruth. "Open it." She stepped forward. The key slid into the lock with a small, clean click. Inside were ribbons first. Red, blue, yellow, soft pieces of a child's world. Beneath them lay folded papers wrapped in oilcloth, a thin ledger, and 3 signed statements. Ruth opened the first page. His face changed as he read. The yard around them grew quiet. "Names," he said softly. "Payments, herd counts, deed transfers, Pike's mark on all of it." He turned another page. Then another. His mouth tightened with grief and justice mixed together. Amos did it. Ruth let out a breath she had not known she was holding. "He saved it?" she asked. Ruth nodded. "And Cole Mercer did not kill him." The word struck Ruth with such force that she had to grip the crate. Cole Mercer did not kill him. Not Silas Vane. Not murderer. Not the name printed on the wanted notice. Cole. A man trying to come back from darkness. Ruth looked at Barlow, who had gone silent now, and Mercer Pike just lost the ground under his boots. By evening, Abilene had changed. Word moved faster than horses. Pike's ledger reached the judge before sundown. Riders were sent with warrants. The men who had hidden behind false papers and bought silence began finding that truth, once opened, had a hard time being shut again. Wade Barlow was locked in a cell before dark. The man caught with him gave up 2 more names before supper. Ruth did not stay to hear all of it. She went back to Reed's house with Marshal Ruth and placed the cedar box in Lily's hands. The little girl looked at the ribbons, then at the papers Ruth had taken aside. Was Papa brave? Ruth knelt slowly, his face lined with pain. Yes, Lily, braver than most men ever get the chance to be. Lily looked at Ruth. Did the hurt man help him? Ruth's throat tightened. Yes, she said. He carried what your papa trusted him with. Lily reached into the box and pulled out the red ribbon. She held it out to Ruth. "For him," she said. Ruth took it with both hands. She rode back to Martha Bell's cabin the next morning with Marshal Rourke beside her, and the red ribbon folded safe in her pocket. Every mile felt too long. When the cabin came into view, smoke rose from the chimney. Martha stood on the porch with a cup in her hand. Cole was not beside her. Ruth's heart dropped. She swung down before Juniper stopped. "Where is he?" Martha looked toward the barn. Ruth ran. Cole sat just inside the open barn door on a hay bale, wrapped in a blanket, pale but alive. Morning light fell across his face. His black gelding stood nearby, nosing gently at his shoulder as if scolding him for worrying everyone. Cole looked up. Ruth stopped in the doorway. For a moment neither spoke. Then he saw her face and knew. "It was there," he said. Ruth nodded. "It was there." His eyes closed. The breath that left him sounded like a man setting down a burden he had carried across half his life. Rourke stepped into the doorway behind Ruth. "Cole Mercer, the warrant for Sela's vein is being withdrawn. You will still answer for crimes you did commit under Pike's outfit, but not for Reed's death." Cole opened his eyes. "I will answer." "I believe you will," Rourke said. "That is why I am not putting irons on you today." Cole looked at Ruth. She crossed the barn and took the red ribbon from her pocket. "Lily sent this." Cole stared at the ribbon in her hand. His face broke quietly, not with loud tears but with the kind of grief that finally finds a door. He took it as if it were something sacred. "She should hate me," he whispered. "She asked if you helped her father." His hand closed around the ribbon. "What did you say?" "The truth." Cole looked up at her then. The barn was silent except for the horse shifting in the straw and the soft winter wind touching the door. Ruth saw the man fully in that moment. Not clean, not simple, not saved by one good act, but honest enough to face the road behind him and brave enough to walk the harder road ahead. Weeks passed before Cole was strong enough to travel. During that time, Pike was taken near the Smoky Hill crossing, not by revenge but by warrants, witnesses, and the ledger a dead deputy had hidden in his daughter's ribbon box. Some of Pike's men ran. Some talked. Some found that fear was a poor shelter once the law had names. Cole gave testimony in Abilene before a judge. He admitted what he had done. He refused to dress guilt in pretty words. Because of his help, and because the ledger proved he had tried to carry Reed's truth, his sentence was not a noose or a dark cell forever. It was restitution, witness work, and labor under watch until the court was satisfied he had paid what could be paid. Ruth returned to her ranch before Christmas. She went alone. That was the hardest kindness. Cole wanted to ride with her, but he had work to do in Abilene, legal work, painful work, the kind that cleans a name slowly. Ruth understood. Love, if that was what had begun between them, could not be built on running from unfinished truth. At the Callahan ranch, she opened the door to a cold house and did not feel as empty as before. She made 1 cup of coffee the first morning. Then, after a long pause, she set out a second cup beside it. Not because she expected Cole to walk through the door. Because hope deserved a place at the table. Letters began in January. Cole's handwriting was careful, each line a man trying to say only what he meant. He wrote about the testimony, the work, the names he had given, the widow of Amos Reed and Lily, who had finally accepted the red ribbon back after making him promise to visit her father's grave. Ruth wrote about cattle, fences, weather, and the oak tree behind the house. In March, Cole came to the Callahan ranch again. This time, he did not arrive bleeding. He rode up in clean daylight on a sound horse, with his hat in his hands before he reached the gate. Ruth watched from the porch, the same porch Thomas had built, her heart steady and aching all at once. Cole stopped outside the gate. "I can sleep in the barn," he called gently. Ruth felt tears rise, but she smiled through them. "No," she said, "you can come in for coffee." He opened the gate slowly, as if he understood that crossing it meant more than entering land. It meant entering a life where the past would not be erased, but it would not be the only thing standing. That evening before sunset, Ruth took him to the oak tree. Thomas's grave rested beneath new whitewash, clean and quiet. Cole removed his hat and stood beside her without speaking. Ruth loved him a little more for that silence. "I thought loving again would mean leaving Thomas behind," she said. Cole looked at the grave, then at her. "Maybe love is not a road that closes behind us. Maybe it is a lamp we carry forward." Ruth took his hand. They stood there until the sky turned gold over the Kansas grass, until juniper grazed near the fence, until the house behind them glowed warm in the last light. The ranch was still Ruth's. Thomas was still part of its soil. Deputy Reed's truth had found daylight. Cole Mercer had found the start of a name he could live under. And Ruth Callahan, who once thought safety meant locking every door against the world, learned that sometimes life returns as a wounded stranger at sundown, asking only for a barn. Tell me in the comments, would you have trusted Cole after learning his past, or would you have sent him away? And if this story stayed with you, subscribe for more emotional Wild West stories where love, pain, and justice meet on the frontier. The last image anyone remembered from that spring was simple. 2 cups of coffee on a kitchen table, a red ribbon tied near the window, and a woman who was no longer afraid of hearing footsteps come home.